Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out Poisoner in Chief. The first chapter is called Dirty Business. This is part 2 of this chapter, Dirty Business. Should everyone who helped run the Nazi machine be prosecuted for war crimes? Or could some be brought to work for the U.S. government instead? The question came to President Roosevelt in 1944. William Donovan, director of the Office of Strategic Services, which is the precursor to the CIA, asked the president for permission to launch a new recruiting project. Nazi spies were beginning to fall into American hands. Some knew much about the Soviet Union. Donovan wanted authority to grant them immunity from prosecution and permitted for entry into the United States after the war. Even though this project would recruit spies only, not scientists, Roosevelt refused. The carrying out of any such guarantees would be difficult and probably be widely misunderstood, both in this country and abroad, he wrote in rejecting Donovan's request. We may expect that the number of Germans who are anxious to save their skins and property will rapidly increase. Among them may be some who should properly be tried for war crimes, or at least arrested for active participation in Nazi actions. Even with the necessary controls you mentioned, I am not prepared to authorize the giving of guarantees. Neither the letter nor the spirit of the directive was ever followed. One of the most senior Nazi intelligence officers, Colonel Reinhard Gehlen, surrendered to American forces in 1945, a few weeks after Roosevelt's death, and quickly made a deal under which he turned his spy network over to the Office of Strategic Services in exchange for legal protection and a generous stipend. Once it was established that Nazi intelligence offers could be quickly forgiven and brought into America's service, a precedent was set for Nazi scientists. The Army established a new covert service, the Joint Intelligence Objective Agencies, for the role purpose of finding and recruiting scientists who had served in the Third Reich. Its officers sought to isolate scientists so they could not return to their wartime work-fueling German military power, keep them out of Soviet hands, and when desirable, arrange new jobs for them in the United States. At the Kranzberg Castle Interrogation Center, clerks began using paper clips to mark the files of prisoners whose background presented the most troublesome cases. In that particular came the code name for the clandestine project by which Nazi scientists were given falsified biographies and brought to work in the United States. Operation Paperclip. President Harry Truman set in motion on September 3, 1946. His secret order, drawn up by intelligence officers and approved by Undersecretary of State Dean Acheson, authorized the issuance of up to 1,000 visas for German and Austrian scientists in the interest of national security. 1,000 visas. It specifically forbade cooperation with anyone who had been a member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participated in its activities or an active supporter of Nazi militarism. If followed, the restriction would have kept Operation Paperclip small indeed. The operation's main goal was to recruit German rocket scientists whose jobs during the war, producing missiles that killed thousands of civilians in London and other European cities, certainly qualified them as active supporters of Nazi militarism. With remarkable alacrity, the Joint Intelligence Objective Agency cast those concerns aside. Operation Paperclip proceeded as if Truman's stipulation did not exist. Ultimately, more than 700 scientists, 700 out of 1,000, scientists, engineers, and other technical specialists who had served the Third Reich came to the United States on paperclip contracts. Soon after the war ended, the Chemical Warfare Service was upgraded in importance and renamed the Chemical Corps. Its commander watched enviously as Nazi spies were brought under American protection, and as soon afterward, the welcome was extended to Nazi rocket scientists. They proposed opening the pipeline wider so they could hire the Nazis they coveted. physicians, chemists, and biologists who gave them results of experiments that had been conducted at concentration camps. The officers running Operation Paperclip found this a fine idea. With their help, 3 German scientists who had worked on chemical and biological warfare project arrived at Camp Dietrich less than 1 year after the war ended. All have been members of the Nazi Party. Both of their assignments was to teach Americans about sarin, a gas that they had helped develop in Germany that seemed especially promising for battlefield use. In their lectures, the new arrivals used records from their wartime experiments. The records show that most of their subjects died within 2 minutes after inhaling their first doses of sarin, and that age of the subject seemed to make no difference to the lethality of the toxic vapor. During World War II, Nazi doctors carried out experiments that led to many deaths. Their work gave them, as it had given spies and rocket engineers, experience that some in Washington believed might prove decisive in a future war. For the officers of Operation Paperclip, it was an easy call. Whatever a scientist was coveted turned out to have a blemish on his records. They rewrote his biography. They systematically expunged references to membership of the SS, collaboration with the Gestapo, abuse of slave laborers, and experiments on human subjects. Applicants who had been rated by interrogators as ardent Nazis were recategorized as not an ardent Nazi. References to this exemplary family lives were added. Once they had been thus bleached, they became suitable candidates for the paperclip contracts. In effect, according to one study of this period, the scientific teams were blinders. Dazzled by German technology that was in some cases years ahead of their own, they simply ignored its evil foundation, which sometimes meant stepping over around piles of dead bodies, and pursued Nazi scientific knowledge like a forbidden fruit. This practice did not go unchallenged. The State Department assigned several diplomats to Operation Paperclip that they claimed to bleaching consular officers threatened to withhold visas for scientific implications in war crimes. At home, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced that it would conduct its own checks of former Nazis seeking entry into the United States. The American Federation of Scientists wrote to President Truman, warning him that some of the applicants were hiding bloody pasts. Newspapers reported that one of the first paperclip contracts had been offered to an industrial chemist, Karl Crouch, co-designer of the LG Farben chemical plant at Auschwitz, but that before Crouch could be brought to the United States, he was arrested as a war criminal in West Germany and charged with the enslavement, ill treatment, terrorization, torture, and murder of numerous people, as well as other crimes such as the production and supply of poison gas for experimental purposes on and the experimentation of concentration camp inmates. Soon cheers from the prominent Nazis were convicted and punished. Captain Boyket Wev, the pugnacious 42-year-old former submarine commander who ran Operation Paperclip, did not. In a stream of vituperative memos to Washington, Webb accused the State Department of sabotaging his operation, beating a dead Nazi horse by harping on picayune details such as whether a scientist has been given an SS member. He warned that if the U.S. refused to accept tainted Nazi scientists, many could end up working on war-related projects in Germany or the Soviet Union. That prospect, he concluded, presents a far greater security threat than any former Nazi affiliations which may have had or even had Nazi sympathies, which they may still have. The dispute spilled into Congress. Recalcitrant diplomats were pilloried as sinister figures and fellow travelers whose moralizing endangered the American security. Press reports portrayed the conflict as showing, in the words of one television commentator, how a few minor officials in the State Department have succeeded in blocking a program of high military importance. One of these bureaucratic conflicts became political. The outcome was determined. American fears were rising. The Cold War loomed. Diplomats who wished to confine Operation Paperclip, within the limits of President Truman, had said were no match for the combined power of military and security agencies. The objections were pushed aside. Scientists at Camp Dietrich were eager to learn what Kurt Blome knew. During extended interrogations in Germany, he slowly lowered his guard enough to suggest that he was keeping terrible secrets. If you watched my stream yesterday, you know about Kurt Blome already. As a reward and a sign of respect, he was moved from his cell to an apartment in a lovely chalet. Meanwhile, his admirers at Camp Dietrich, if you watched my stream yesterday, you know what Camp Dietrich's up to, worked to arrange a paperclip contract that would bring him to Maryland. They almost succeeded. So we're going to end here, and we're going to try to finish this chapter tomorrow. So we want to thank all the crime community members that are trying to solve the relationships between JFK and the Operation Paperclip and the Manson file and everything else. We pray and we hope we get your respect and kindness, and like and subscribe.